ATSC 3.0 has the capability to make things more accessible. How is that more accessible when, the SNR is now higher?
Our consumer is going to have to figure out the best way to receive something. It may not be that flat antenna.
I just spoke with Dave Arland, who is the spokesman for the ATSC, Pearl TV, and the A3SA, the much-loved entity behind the DRM that's going on with ATSC 3.0. One of the key points that I wanted to bring up to an industry insider like him is the point that I believe the future of over-the-air TV isn't exclusively with a device that has an F connector that requires an external antenna. Yes, do I think that that will continue to be the case for many decades? Of course. But in order to reach younger people like me on the go, in order to have a more modern broadcast ecosystem, having devices that don't require an external dongle or some sort of external connector in order to use broadcast services is key. And that's why I like 5G broadcast so much. And I brought this up to him. But I think that's one of the important messages about all of this is there is a shrinking audience for over-the-air TV. And the new generation, people like me, that are actually going to be the ones in the future dealing with the media landscape. As a generation, we're not going to be using bulky external antennas. I do not see that as being the future. 5G broadcast promises this a lot more than ATSC 3.0 does. So it was very interesting to hear his perspective on that. And I think that's one of the biggest things that my channel's been about lately has been more accessible reception. But we go into a lot of other things as well. We go into DRM a little bit. We go into more accessibility with ATSC 3.0. We go into stations raising SNRs, minimum receive SNRs, and making it harder to receive ATSC 3.0 stations. He talks about what ATSC 3.0 is, and so many other things. The interview is over an hour long. So here is my interview with Dave Arland. Well, first, for the audience, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Sure. My name is Dave Arland, and I wear a lot of hats in the television industry. I work for the Advanced Television Systems Committee. I work for a group called Pearl TV, which is a group of broadcast companies. It's about 820 stations around the country that are promoting next-gen television or ATSC 3.0. And then I also do some work for the security authority that is charged with protecting the signals that are being transmitted just to make sure things are safe in this modern era. So kind of depending on what you want to talk about, I can put on different hats.
Yeah.
You can probably see over my shoulder, I also represent Indiana broadcasters. I run the Indiana Broadcasters Association. And so I'm based in Indianapolis, right in the middle of the country.
Gotcha. Thanks for sharing. For me, my personal background, I'm a 20-year-old electrical engineering student that goes to Florida International University in Miami, Florida. I'm not there currently. I'm home for summer in Western New York, but I love all things radio, RF, and I have a special interest in broadcasting, which is kind of rare for somebody my age, but I just love the potential of broadcast, the one-to-many model.
Likewise, I like that too. So, and we both have fantastic microphones, so that's good.
Yeah, isn't that great? So I think the first question that I want to ask you is, if there was somebody that didn't know what ATSC 3.0 was, how would you describe ATSC 3.0 to them?
It's really a way for local broadcast stations and networks to advance into the next generation of television broadcasting. We've been using a system here in the US. If you go all the way back to the beginning, black and white television started in 1939 at the World's Fair in New York, and was kind of put to sleep, if you will, for a little nap during World War II, and all the resources used for television were put to use with radar and making sure that we could win the war. It emerged from the war, became remarkably successful, still black and white though, until the 1950s. And then there was something called the NTSC, the National Television Systems Committee, that was impaneled to create a way that we could have color television on the one hand, and at the same time have black and white television. Millions and millions of people had purchased black and white TV, but they didn't want to, the FCC didn't want to disenfranchise people, so they wanted a compatible system. And that system was approved sort of as a Christmas present to the industry in 1953. And from 1954 until the 1990s, we used the same analog TV system, just color TV, or frankly, just TV, until the time when the idea of high definition came to pass. And that idea started actually in Japan. Japan is a much different country than the US. Lots of things about Japan to like. One of them, though, that's very different is they only have a handful of TV stations. So they had proposed, the Japanese had proposed this high definition system that would have consumed 6 or 7 or 8 channels of a US television in order to transmit. So while the pictures looked fantastic, and I remember seeing some of those demonstrations years ago, it really was not practical in our system here in the US, where we have 1,600 plus commercial television stations, plus public broadcasters on the air. And so it wasn't until the 1990s where video compression came into play. There was something called MPEG-2 that was deployed. MPEG is an acronym, lots of acronyms in this, for Motion Picture Experts Group. And what that says is basically you can toss overboard certain frames of video because things move so quickly that it won't matter. The human eye will not discern that something is missing. We'll kind of fill in the blanks. So we were able to squeeze much more detail into a transmitted image and launch something called digital television, which was not compatible with analog television. And thus, sorry, this answer is so long, but
it's okay.
2009, we shut off analog television and the whole world went to digital TV, which was only 15 years ago. But when these standards were approved to do digital TV, the fax machine was thought to be, cutting edge. There was no internet service to speak of. Not everybody had a cell phone, and those who did have a cell phone, it was like a brick you put up to your ear. So as the industry has moved, as computers have moved, as streaming has become more popular and more just every day, television broadcasters over the air were sort of stuck with the system that was a quarter century old. So if you rewind to about 7 or 8 years ago, the industry said, look, streaming we think is going to be a big deal. Netflix had just started. All the other services that are very common today, Peacock, Hulu, Disney Plus, Paramount Plus, all of those were yet to come. And yet television broadcasters knew they were going to have to get with the program in order to compete and to offer. Part of it was competition, but part of it also was consumer behavior. And the thing that was coming was this thing in your pocket, right? This little guy was going to replace the big console television, or at least supplement that for a lot of people. And I think some of that depends on age. At your age as a college kid, this probably, well, maybe not you, because you're an electrical engineer, but for a lot of students, that is television. And there was no way with digital TV previously to put that onto a device like this. So that's the reason why, again, 7 or 8 years ago, the industry established the ATSC 3.0 effort. 3.0 being, if digital TV was ATSC 1.0, there was an ATSC 2.0. That was going to be 3D TV, which didn't really go anywhere. So 2.0 was never deployed. And the industry focused now on 3.0, which, like the transition from analog to digital, is not a compatible service. You're going to need a new receiver. The transmissions have to be new. But there are some big differences, too, between what happened in 2009, 15 years ago, when the government was pretty heavily involved, and today, where the government has said, okay, broadcasters, you can make this transition. You can launch ATSC 3 channels voluntarily, but you cannot just turn off ATSC 1.0, at least not yet. And so we're sort of in this period of the very beginnings of this transition. Somewhere around 12 million or so television sets have been sold at this point that can do ATSC 3.0 with an antenna. And Americans are buying about 12,000 of those every day. So eventually, ATSC 3.0 will replace ATSC 1.0. Why go through all of this? Well, again, the addition of streaming and the ability to be both over the air as well as over the top. So bring those two things together.
Yeah.
Also, though, it's 4 times more efficient. So again, you can just squeeze a lot more data. You can now do ultra high definition video if that's your desire, or you could do lots of streaming channels plus additional things, and you can connect to the internet. So honestly, to sum all that up, it's broadcasters working to stay at pace with how technology is developing.
Yeah, something I'd like to add to that. I actually have a quick story to share with you. So I talked about over-the-air broadcasting, the fact that you could pick up free TV channels with an antenna in one of my public speaking classes in college. And almost nobody knew what I was talking about. Again, it's a room filled with people my age approximately. There were, I think, 1 or 2 people that actually knew what I was talking about. And one of the guys, after I spoke, was talking to me about how bad his experience was with over-the-air TV. He said he actually showed me a video on his phone. It was like I think New Year's time. I think it was like the ball drop, and he had his like phone recording it. This was South Florida, so I think at his window there was like a palm tree wagging, and it was a super windy day. And he had one of those like indoor mud flap antennas that's
Right.
horrible with reception. So basically, what came out of it is I had such a horrible experience with over-the-air TV. Why does anybody use this? And I think that's what's so crucial about the switch over to ATSC 3.0 is just how bad, and that's my opinion, but ATSC 1.0 is very bad, obviously, with multipath interference. 8 VSB is not a good modulation method. It's very inefficient. Again, we can talk about how in the 90s it was relatively good back then. But for our use cases now, it is very outdated. And if there's any reason why I think we should be switching to ATSC 3.0 first and foremost, it's for that reason, with people having a hard time. Here I have giant antennas, giant Yagis in my attic, and it doesn't even matter. A signal could be 35, 36 decibels with an SNR. And if it is a super windy day out, it'll still occasionally break in and out because of the modulation method and the fact that it's just not immune to multipath. So I think multipath is just a huge issue. And the fact that with OFDM and with all those additions, guard intervals, scatter pilot patterns, everything that we can do to make the signal, make that waveform more robust, it is really, really good for the industry.
Yeah, I just want to interject. I mean, you're absolutely right. You have to also put yourself in the mindset. See, you're 20 years old, so you were born
Yeah.
what year?
2004.
2004.
Yeah.
So the standard for ATSC 1.0, believe it or not, was adopted in 1996, and it was worked on before that. And so the standard was developed, believe it or not, with the idea that I've got a console television, probably a big wood console, sitting with a 27-inch screen, sitting in my living room, one television, and it's connected to an antenna with a 20-foot mast outdoors to an antenna. That was the assignment. So if you have a 20-foot tall antenna aimed at a transmitter, ATSC 1 will do okay, but it certainly isn't designed for movement. And you're right, weather can have an impact.
Yeah, I shouldn't have to chop down a tree just to watch TV, just to watch reruns of Sanford and Son or something.
People who have satellite dishes have a similar issue.
Yep.
But it actually, Dylan, reminds me of way back. Not that I was there. I'm old, but I'm not that old. In 1931. 8 years before RCA introduced television, they were doing tests in New York City of television and trying to figure out the delta between, how high should the transmitter tower be? At what point should the power be turned? What about the receiving antenna? And a report from RCA Labs in 1931 said, the higher the antenna and the higher the transmission power, the better the picture quality. I mean, sort of basic physics, no big surprise. But even way back then, almost 100 years ago, there were experiments and limitations and things done to try to figure that out. Fortunately, as you have pointed out, 3.0 is much more robust. And we sort of give the keys to the broadcaster, to the local stations to say, okay, are you more interested in an urban environment? Let's use New York City as an example. Of reaching people in their basement apartment or in a skyscraper, so robustness can be dialed way up. Or are you in Colorado and you want to dial it the other way? You want to do distance. You want to be able to reach people further away, or you want to be able to reach people in a moving vehicle. Not that we're advocating that people watch television while they drive, but there are a lot of people sitting in a car. Someday, maybe autonomous cars will be even more prominent than they are today. And so television might be something that you'd want to watch in a car, maybe. And
Yeah.
ATSC 3 has been tested in bullet trains going 170 miles an hour with no issues in signal breakup. That's in Korea, not here, obviously.
I
So
wish he was here.
I wish it was here.
Yeah. So one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about is obviously we started talking about mobile TV. So unfortunately, in the past, there have been a lot of attempts at mobile broadcast, internet protocol mobile broadcast. There was Qualcomm's Media Flow that
Yep.
didn't end out very well. There was ATSC mobile handheld. Even AT&T had LTE broadcast. It was a cellular carrier trying to get into broadcast a little bit. That didn't work. So what makes ATSC 3.0 different when we have a whole history of mobile devices not working with broadcast or it not taking off? What makes 3.0 different in this case?
I think the big thing is that in all of those examples, whether it's media flow from Qualcomm, which was eventually sold off and closed down, whether it was what happened with ATSC 1.0 or these other examples, these are all sidecar implementations. It was like, well, here's the main service, but we're going to plug in, and 1.0 is probably the best example of this. ATSC 1.0, again, designed to be received with an antenna on a 20-foot mast outdoors.
Yep.
And yet, okay, now we're going to plug in mobility to that. It worked, not great. I mean, it worked, but it was not only a kind of a kludgy development from a standpoint of adding on to an existing standard, but the other piece of television, of course, is the rights. The mobile rights for a lot of content aren't necessarily owned by the local broadcaster. They may be owned by a telephone company. So there are rights issues, there's technology issues, and that's yet another reason why the idea of ATSC 3 was, okay, let's leapfrog and move to the best possible system. You mentioned internet protocol. I should have mentioned that myself, because ATSC 3 is the first and the only so far television system based on the same language as Netflix, which is, let's face it, that's the language that people use. And if you're going to transmit video, IP-based or other material, IP-based is the way to do it. And so mobility it just becomes another capability. We tend to think of that as, well, I'm going to be able to put a chip in my phone and watch television on my phone. That could happen potentially. There's another issue in the middle here, which is the phone company. So they'd have to want to have that in a handset like this. But the other thing is, with mobility, you can also do some other things that you couldn't do with 1.0. And this is an area that, while it's not something that you would tune into, broadcasters are very interested in new data services. And I'll just use a very simple example. I don't know if you've ever rented a car and you get in the car to drive off, and it says that it needs to borrow your phone's Wi-Fi connection because it needs to do a software update to the car. This is very common. Cars are just like big computers. And so frequently a major rental company will have to take cars out of service, plug them in via USB to the internet in order to update the software. Well, that software update could be done over the air. I mean, there's no reason why an over-the-air transmission couldn't transmit, whether it's to a computer or to a car, a software update. So it's those kinds of things that there's actually have been some demonstrations done with Avis Car Rental, very interested in this idea. So they might build in a 3.0 receiver chip into a car, not necessarily for purposes of letting passengers view television, but really as sort of a business benefit to make sure that car stays on the road.
Yeah. Something I'd like to add is there have been pushes to get 3.0 in smartphones and mobile devices in New York State. I'm sure you were aware of that. And then also in India. Now, in India, all the major smartphone manufacturers are against it, saying that they would not want to include 3.0 in their smartphones if the government of India were to mandate that. Also, when there was the ATSC meeting, I think in June, there was a slide presentation of the projected device sales of TVs and set-top boxes. What
Right.
was missing was mobile devices. So if I can hear from you, what is maybe from your Pearl TV hat, if you will, what is the projection for when we'll start to see mobile ATSC 3.0?
So let me first address the chart you're referring to, which was data from the Consumer Technology Association, which
Yes.
is the association that stages the CES show every year in Las Vegas. I don't know if you've ever been to that, but it's a really, you kind of come away from that like, oh my God, I have to own everything that's out there, you know. Uh, you would really enjoy it, I
Yeah.
think. So anyway, a couple times a year, CTA does its projections about based on input from its membership, what are sales going to be for all kinds of devices, you know, whether it's stereo systems or MP3 players or televisions or game players or whatever. So they are forecasting 4 to 5 million. So it's a projection. It's not a precise instrument, but they tend to be somewhat conservative in their estimates. So let's use the number 4 million. They're saying 4 million-ish next gen TV sets. Next gen TV is the consumer handle for this ATSC 3.0 technology. Right there, I got confetti. I'm not sure why. Maybe it's because I was using quotation marks. So 4 million-ish next gen TV sets projected to be sold this year. That works out to about 12,000 being purchased every day, which is kind of it's a big number, but it's only about 10% of sales. I don't know where Americans put all their TV sets, but we buy 40 million TV sets a year. You know, yes, the mobile device is important. We probably buy a lot more of those, but we still buy a lot of TV sets. Somewhere in the neighborhood of a couple 100,000 set-top receivers are likely going to be sold in various flavors, everywhere from $90 up to $250 and more. And that's just the very beginning of those for those who wish to upgrade. You know, like I bought a new TV 4 or 5 years ago. It's perfectly fine. It doesn't have next gen TV electronics. So there is a way to upgrade with an HDMI connection, you know, to give you that kind of service. The question of mobile, though, is you really, again, you've got somebody else in the middle, and that's AT&T and Verizon and other cell phone companies that frankly enjoy the idea of you spending money for data and charging you for that privilege. So
What Unicast is so good for.
right. Now, all it takes, though, is going to something like a major sporting event where that isn't being broadcast in the stadium, which they do from time to time with, I know in Indianapolis, when I go to a Colts game, I can get Wi-Fi service and see, you know, what's happening with the game through the local stream. But that's not commonplace everywhere. And so in the US, which is different than India or other countries, the network operator would have to make the decision, well, in order to get this in a mobile device, you're either going to need an accessory, and there are some of those that are available that will plug into a device, or you're going to need to get that's going to need to be a feature of the phone. And this actually, shortly after you were born, the iPhone came out, 2007.
2007.
And I remember that because I was just starting out. I had left a big electronics firm and started my own little company. And I couldn't wait to be unleashed from the corporate stuff, right? And I could finally get an iPhone. And I got an iPhone. And one of the features of the iPhone in 2007, I believe in the very first iPhones, was it had Wi-Fi. Now, you would not normally think that Wi-Fi in a phone would be supremely controversial. And yet, until 2007, until the iPhone, there was no Wi-Fi in phones. Why was that? Because the phone companies were afraid that you'd be making all these free long distance calls via Wi-Fi, you know, via Skype.
IP, yeah.
Which, by the way, is exactly what happened. And so how did the feature of Wi-Fi end up in every cell phone? Well, the consumer demanded it. I mean, the other phone makers saw what happened, and the other companies that weren't offering the iPhone found out that, it wasn't that they wanted to skirt the phone charges, because now the fact that you use this to make a phone call is almost ancillary benefit, right? We use it for so many other things. So I think in order to have ATSC 3 in a mobile device like that, you're going to have AT&T or Verizon or somebody like that go out on a limb and make that a requirement of the phone. I don't want to say it's never going to happen, because there are pundits who said that Wi-Fi would never be in a phone. Again, it's sort of amazing to think, what, you mean there were phones that didn't have, an internet capability except through the phone network? What are you talking about? But that's the way it was up until 2007. So you got to have a player involved, a network operator in this case.
Yeah. So a few things about that. I think more than anything, when you were saying, there has to be consumer demand, there has to be broadcasts that people actually want to watch that would make them want to have ATSC 3.0 in a phone. So I know for my generation, mainly the only thing that people in mass numbers watch that are my age is live sports. Other than that, they're going to be watching Netflix on demand. They're not going to be watching sub channels that have reruns of shows from 30 years ago. That's not the target for mine. And I think, Pearl probably has the numbers of demographics and stuff like that. But in terms of like actually getting, ATSC 3.0 on devices other than just TVs and set-top boxes, the programming is a super important, crucial part of that. Also about the set-top boxes and about getting like iPhones and stuff to use it. The A3SA DRM is Google Widevine based.
Yeah.
So all of my set-top boxes, in fact, the first set-top box that I got that was a 3.0 set-top box was the ADTH box. It was my first Android box because I'm an Apple guy. I just use Apple devices for everything. The Zenwell box that I got, also an app or also a Google Android device.
Yep.
The problem with that is because the A3SA DRM is based on the Google Widevine encryption, how would, like, let's say an iPhone in the future wanted to be able to access ATSC 3.0 services, how would it even work with the A3SA DRM content security?
Yeah, A3SA is talking to Apple. I mean, I think that's sort of the next step. So everybody wants everything immediately, and these things, whether it's the programming or the devices, if I stay on the devices for just a second, there is, as you know, a very active, engaged, first mover AVS forum kind of community that wants a gateway device, that wants to spread the content throughout their home. I'm going to say just the home, just for now. I want to have one thing in the basement that feeds 100 rooms in my house.
That is actually what I do, but
perfect. That's great. But you are a super, super, super sub-minority, right? Of
course.
Most people are not you. Yeah. And it isn't that gateway devices aren't coming. They are coming. Some people have said, well, you're using content protection because you want to drive people to subscriptions, or you want to stop home recording rights, which is bogus. BOGUS. The Zapper box is the first ATSC 3.0 receiver that is security verified, that is a DVR. Now, it's not a gateway device. It's not going to feed, dozens of rooms in your house, but it is a step in that direction. And I think you have to walk before you run. So for these issues of the kind of device that I want to use in my house that does X, Y, and Z, those things are coming. I'm an Apple person. What about Apple? What about the iPhone? What about the Apple TV? What about other devices like that? Also, I think those will come eventually. And we kind of had to start somewhere, and the Google Widevine method was the best method for the bigger audience, which isn't even the set-top boxes, it's the TV sets. So the industry will sell, again, 4 million-ish TV sets and a couple 100,000 set-top boxes this year. Eventually, that needle, the CTA chart that you referenced from the ATSC meeting shows that in 2026, 2027, probably everything that's sold will have ATSC 3. I mean, kind of like the iPhone and Wi-Fi. I mean, you're going to need to have that when you go into a store. That'll be an expectation. So, I mean, that's how I would address the security question and also the device question. But you also brought up, Dylan, a really good point that I want to come back to about content. I would agree with you that you need to have something that people really want to watch. You yourself are a sports person. I would tend to be probably, I'm a Trekkie, so I'm more of like I like the dot two channels. I mean, my wife and I watch Perry Mason every night, which is ridiculous. It's from the 1950s. Who watches black and white television? They actually have really good stories. I really like that. But this is not going to be successful if we can't deliver to the consumer a better experience. And I think in terms of ATSC 3, in addition to turning on the broadcast signals, and we're on the air now in 75 markets around the country, which nicely, just by coincidence, happens to be 75% of viewers in America can see ATSC 3 if they have a receiver. So the devices are beginning to be sold. It's on the air in 75% of homes. Now you have to offer something that's compelling that isn't just the same old television. And that's where we start. And actually, it just started in May with local stations now upgrading their signals to do high dynamic range. And so the Kentucky Derby was the first sporting event that was broadcast in Dolby Vision and Dolby Atmos. And that's the first. I hope that we're going to see a lot more sporting events because I agree with you that live sports is not only very appealing to a wide swath of America, but it's also where you're going to see the greatest opportunity for real difference in picture quality. And so these conversations about where is it, this transition's underway, where is all this stuff? It's so funny because to me, I remember 1990, not 1996 when the standard was approved, not 1997 when there weren't any receivers. It wasn't until 1998 that the very first HD receivers were sold. $10,000 Panasonic TV with a separate receiver, separate set-top box you had to plug in. And there was zero HD TV on the air, none. So, I mean, it took a long time for and it wasn't that broadcasters didn't want to offer it, but you had a camera at a stadium and no way to get that signal in high def back to the studio and then transmit it. And we've got that very similar, although I think it's going to not take as long, issue today. You've got 4K or in some cases 8K or 16K capable cameras at a sporting event, and consumers who have an 85-inch QLED whatever, that can do amazing pictures, but the infrastructure in between isn't quite where it needs to be. Now we have broadcast transmissions that can handle up to 4K someday, but you've got a lot of other pieces in the chain that have to happen really to make it work. And
Yes.
then, we're sharing, I know you know this, but just for the benefit of people who are watching,
Yeah, of course.
the way that this is being rolled out, because the FCC has said, yes, broadcasters, you can launch ATSC 3.0 service, but you cannot shut off your 1.0 service. You have to collaborate. So even though in a market, I'll use my market of Indianapolis, which is where I live, I can see out my window the TV towers for some of our stations here. We have to collaborate. So ABC, NBC, CBS, Fox, in some markets, PBS, even though they are fighting for ad dollars or sponsorship dollars in the same market, they have to collaborate. Somebody has to give up their transmitter stick and say, okay, my stick, I'm the Fox affiliate. I will be the ATSC 3 transmitter for the entire city of Indianapolis. Using my city as an example. And so ABC, NBC, CBS, Fox, they're all going to be on the same stick. But if you put everybody voluntarily on the same stick, you need the whole stick or the entire channel to do 4K. So we cannot yet do what this standard is really capable of doing until we can shut off 1.0 and then every broadcaster can have a 3.0 service.
Well, I'd like to add to that if I can. One of the things that I've noticed here in Western New York with our lighthouse here, WNYO, it's operated by Sinclair. What they used to have is three PLPs. The first PLP was like 12 decibels for a minimum receive SNR, and it had one TV channel. The second PLP, PLP1, had a 14 decibel minimum SNR, had one TV channel. And then the last one, PLP2, had three TV channels, and it was at like a 21 decibel minimum SNR. So if you didn't have a 21 decibel minimum SNR on your TV antenna, whatever, you would still be able to get two channels. What's happened as Sinclair has started their DDAAS, data delivery as a service, is they got rid of those lower, more accessible tiers. And now everything requires a 21 decibel SNR. So when that station was ATSC 1.0, it only required a 15 decibel SNR and you were able to get TV. Now you need 6 decibels higher in order to just get anything. And unfortunately, I feel like what's happening, and maybe you can reassure me on this, is I'm seeing a lot of broadcasters almost pushing aside the TV aspect and kind of prioritizing some of the time resources or the bandwidth resources for data delivery. And I want broadcasters to be able to use their spectrum for other purposes. But, when we're getting into mobile TV and ATSC 3.0 has the capability to make things more accessible, how is that more accessible when, the SNR is now higher? And just one other thing I'd like to add. One of the things that definitely broadcasters could be doing right now is adding more efficient coding into their transmissions. So I know you said that 4K was not really possible right now. I think if you combine like layered division multiplexing with versatile video encoding, you could make that work on a 6 megahertz channel. There's, innovative ways to still make 4K work. So I don't really buy necessarily that 4K can't happen right now with the current setup. You can, I guess, respond to that. I know that was a lot in one.
That's okay, and we have limited time. So I think it's important to give broadcasters the flexibility to innovate and to find ways that they can have additional revenue streams, because the television business is not what it was.
I agree.
Even going back 15 years ago. So are there going to be growing pains such as what you described with the station in your area? Of course there are. Are consumers going to have to figure out the best way to receive something? It may not be that flat antenna that's on top of the armoire. I got that question from a consumer this week. No, put the antenna in the window. Some of this is just education because people don't understand physics. And I'm not being
tell me about it.
I'm not being critical. It's just, my mom doesn't understand this kind of stuff, and in some cases we have to educate, which I appreciate. That's part of what you've been doing.
Yeah.
With regard to 4K, my comment was about all 4 of these stations on a host station stick. If they all want to do 4K, they're really going to need their own transmission to do with whatever they will. I agree that layered division multiplexing is one way to be very efficient, and there's going to be other, and maybe you deliver some of the bits over the air and some of the bits over the internet and combine them, and that's been demonstrated as well. But we can't do any of that really until we know when can we shut off 1.0 and have the certainty of knowing, okay, well, I'm going to have my own transmission stick on this date, and I think that's not to put it back in the FCC's lap, but I'm putting it back in the FCC's lap. That's an issue. Then the commission knows this. They got to figure that out. I think what they struggle with is they don't want grandma left behind. They don't want broadcasters to suddenly. Today we have all these stations in America that are 3.0 stacked up on host station sticks. Eventually, it's going to be the other way around. Right? You'll have all these 3.0 stations and all the 1.0 signals will be on one stick.
Yeah.
Because we don't want to leave people behind. Nobody wants to leave people behind, especially broadcasters who are monetizing those signals. Yeah. So a lot of what you're seeing, whether it's content protection, whether it's different devices that are out there, whether it's services that broadcasters are offering, we're in an experimentation period right now. And these growing pains are the sorts of things that we went through with the transition with high def. Everything worked out fine. It was a different situation because broadcasters were loaned a separate channel for high def, for digital TV, and then eventually had to return their analog signals. Space, which was auctioned very profitably to the phone companies. And that was a big deal for the federal government, made a lot of money that way. That's how little history, that's how President Clinton balanced his budget. And I think that in order to get to the point where every station, has its own transmission stick, as I would use in this pen, where they could do ATSC 3.0, eventually we do have to turn off ATSC 1.0. And I appreciate that the FCC has an important mission, and that's to not strand anybody. Nobody wants anybody left behind, least of all television broadcasters who are selling ads to eyeballs. But I also think there's a reality that if Americans are buying soon 40 million TVs a year, let's see, there's 120 million households. I mean, you can do the math and pretty quickly see that if we put the end date for 1.0 out far enough, I think what the industry would appreciate knowing, frankly, is just certainty. Pick a date. By the way, the date could move. The date moved twice for analog to digital TV. It was supposed to happen right as President Obama took office, and he pushed it back a year or whatever. So, I mean, it isn't that the thing couldn't move, but for the moment, there's some pent up kind of, uncertainty, I guess. And nobody likes uncertainty. I think the issues that you raised earlier are important ones, and they're ones that broadcasters are grappling with about, how do we develop a service and launch something that people will want to watch, and also take advantage in the best way possible of this technology, especially at a time when you might think, well, broadcasters, why would they care whether it's over the air or whatever? Isn't everybody watching cable or streaming or whatever? Well, not everybody is the same. And I think there is a change underway about what people would like to be able to do. And that's the great thing about 3.0 is it gives you lots of flexibility.
Yeah, jumping on what you said about cable, I'm going to jump on the cable part and then the accessibility part. So cable is in deep decline right now. And I know the broadcast industry, the free-to-air, over-the-air broadcast industry is heavily almost subsidized, if you will, by the retransmission fees that come from the cable companies. So with a declining cable retransmission revenue, you have to think, well, what else can we do? So in my opinion, I was always thinking, well, how about you just leverage ATSC 3.0? And I think there's been some great discussions about, the data delivery and all sorts of other things. But about accessibility, having ATSC 3.0 available so that, you just open your laptop up or you just launch an app on your smartphone and it uses a 3.0 chip and you can just start watching, a live NFL game for free. No cellular infrastructure required, no internet, Wi-Fi, anything like that required. That is the future that I really want to see with the industry. With
Well, one of these. This little guy, plugs into a USB connection. This is an early product called from Airwaves, and antenna on this side. It's kind of like a Chromecast stick, right? Whether it's this or whether it's literally built into a computer, yes to all the above.
Yeah, definitely. I think my generation, if you were to tell my generation, in order to get an NFL game in very good quality for free, you have to buy a dongle, you have to buy an external antenna. Unfortunately, I think what would happen is there'd be way more people saying, well, I can just find an illegal IPTV link on Reddit, and I don't have to go through all the hassle of connecting this external dongle, connecting this. Like, it feels like we're going backwards in time. I have to connect this bulky, big antenna to watch. So definitely getting it in the small form factor. I mean, the antenna is not going to be amazing in a small form factor, but that's what more robust modulation is for. That's what single frequency networks are for. And I think if the broadcast industry wants to have any sort of meaningful future with young people, that is the direction that you have to go in. It's built on devices that people already use without external antennas, without external equipment. That's kind of why I like 5G broadcast right now so much, because there seems to be more of a promise with that. I like ATSC 3.0 better, as the waveform is superior, but definitely I don't see that happening as much with 3.0. And I know things are still in the early process.
Well, I think that ATSC also very interested in 5G. I think regardless of the waveform, you've got to upgrade from where you are to, you got to go to IP. I mean, that's sort of a baseline requirement. Your comment, though, reminds me of a fact that might be kind of surprising. When you ask people, where do you watch mobile television? Like, meaning what, I'm streaming this.
Yeah.
I'm watching a TV show that I'm streaming. Usually it's at home. I mean, we all think, oh, well, I'm at class or I'm at Starbucks or whatever, but actually most people are, it's the husband sitting watching reruns of something in one room and the wife's in another room with the big TV. So the idea of having a single receiver in a house that could then transmit perhaps via Wi-Fi or some similar method so that you don't have to have a receiving chip in every device is a concept that's been demonstrated, and maybe we'll get to something like that. I think your point, I agree with it, by the way, is it's got to be simple. We can't.
Yes.
People aren't. A science fair is not the idea here.
No.
And actually, that's one of the things that's so attractive and why the industry started on big screen TV sets, because you can literally just build it into the TV. It's expensive as a component initially. So the bigger the TV, the more latitude you have to build that in. Yes, you have to connect an antenna. Yes, it needs to be connected to the internet, ideally. But most people who bring home a TV are connecting it to the internet anyway. It's something north of 95% of new television sets get connected in that way. So I think all of these iterations are things that are coming. It is a little bit of chicken and egg, meaning that on the one hand, broadcasters want to have lots of people with these receivers, but on the other hand, people aren't going to buy receivers if they don't have some differentiated, better experience of something to watch. That's why high dynamic range, just to come back to that for a moment, that started now in sports broadcast, and I think you're going to see it in many other things. A local station can turn on high dynamic range, give you much deeper color gamut, much better picture quality for everything, not just sports. They turn that on and everything looks better and things can sound better as well. So one thing that I know you wanted to chat about was cable.
Yes.
Yeah, of course, it's true that retransmission consent is a major fund. It's about half the revenue of a typical TV station is what they collect in what are called retrans fees, or what they charge cable operators, satellite operators, and telco companies for carrying their signals. By the way, most of local television that gets watched, most television that gets watched is local. It's local sports, local news, local weather. So of course people stream movies and TV series. I do that too. But if you actually see what people watch, it's mostly local stuff at home. So cable is on a downtrend in terms of subscriptions. It's still pretty high. I mean, it's still well over half of the country is connected and paying a cable subscription. I think cable is actually interested in ATSC 3, though, for a different reason. The cable industry, or some in the cable industry. And it comes back to that point you made about IP. So ATSC 3.0 is a technology that is internet protocol based. And cable can now use the lever that to their advantage to do more accessibility. And Comcast NBC has demonstrated as an example that they could now deliver Spanish language programming in stereo. Now, this doesn't sound like it's a major accomplishment, but today, if you buy a TV and you take it home and you switch on it, the SAP channel, the second audio program channel, and you start listening in Spanish, it's in mono, because that's as much bandwidth as the cable operator has to transmit a second audio program. Since it's IP-based, now not only can you do stereo with a second language, you can add other languages really easily because it's just IP. It's not super difficult to do. So I think there are actually some accessibility improvements that can come. We haven't talked about emergency alerting. The main advantage with this technology is with ATSC 3 is you can be very granular. So there may be a chemical spill that's affecting my area, but not affecting the other side of town. So a local news department could use polygons and say, okay, those of you in this area, you're going to get this alert, but the rest of our viewership, where I live, tornadoes are a big thing, and a tornado could skew and go north of town or go south of town or go right through the middle of town. So you don't have to like freak out your entire viewing audience necessarily. You can specify who gets the emergency alert. And that's a nice enhancement that hasn't really been fully, I know you're aware of that. It has not yet been fully deployed, but it's a capability that I think broadcasters are going to start to use.
Yeah, about the emergency alerting, I'm sure you know my thoughts on that so far. We actually just had a tornado here in Western New York, a couple of them, just I think 2 counties south of here. It's remnants of Hurricane Beryl that came through, and it caused a whole bunch of tornadoes in the southern tier of Western New York. Unfortunately, with the ATSC 3.0 stations in that emergency alerting section, there was no mention of a tornado at all for any counties in that area or anywhere. So yeah, I mean, I am disappointed right now with the fact that there's no good emergency alerting with 3.0 at the moment. It seems the only way to do it is with the internet, which I would say then, well,
Well,
my phone already does that.
it's actually, I would back up one step further. The best way is to tune to your local station, and your local station is going to interrupt programming or run a crawl. So when we talk about localized emergency alerts, it is enhancing what they're already doing. So it isn't that the receiving device is going to be markedly different. It is that the broadcaster will have the ability to change and be more specific to alert the people only in those 2 counties, and not necessarily the entire 12 county viewing area, as an example. You are correct that it has not been fully deployed yet. I think, again, it's a walk before you run, and there have to be implementations, usually led by the news departments of stations, and the weathercasters, et cetera. So that is something that's coming that isn't fully deployed yet.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that are not fully baked yet, right? With 3.0, unfortunately, at the moment. I mean, it's been around since I think it finalized in 2018 is when it officially finalized. South Korea had already implemented it like a year before it was officially finalized. There's still things being added. So yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate. I just think, I'm a consumer facing YouTube channel, and when there's people asking me, well, the broadcasters are promising one thing with all these emergency alerts, that's partially what, got the FCC to even approve ATSC 3.0 in the first place. You'd think that maybe that's something that they would focus on a bit more in their transmissions to make sure that the warrant system is, done properly and things of that nature. So yeah, I mean, when I get comments of people saying, there was a major storm, and other than what was available on ATSC 1, there was no, evacuation routes and 10 languages with, the alert and everything like that. So yeah, it's disappointing right now. And like you said, I hope that in the future things change and things, start to develop more.
Well, again, it's kind of like the people who were disappointed that in 1988 there wasn't high def TV on every channel. There was high def TV on some sports and some movies initially. I mean, today it's universal. You don't even think about it because everything's in high definition. Even stuff that's crappy videos up converted to high def.
Oh, of course.
And so it doesn't even enter the consciousness that you would have a 480i transmission. What? Huh? But that's what we were used to until high def. So I think you and I are looking at the same issue, maybe from different parts of the straw.
Yeah.
I look at it like, okay, well, we first got to get stations on the air, and secondly, we got to get people to buy the equipment to receive it, and then you can start to add things like advanced emergency alerting, which I do think is coming, as well as high dynamic range, whether that's Dolby Atmos or other flavors, or Dolby Vision and Dolby Atmos. There's different ways you can do it. The end result, though, I think, is a better experience for the viewer, and also to make local stations even more relevant than they already are. I think that's pretty well cemented for an older viewer like me. For you, maybe not so much. I mean, you said yourself, you've got lots of content sources. You'll tune into a local station, maybe if the weather's bad or if it's local sports you want to see.
Yep.
But as for the other stuff, Wheel of Fortune, you don't care about. Today's show, you probably don't watch. Okay, I do, but broadcasters have to serve a very large audience, and I feel the frustration. I get it, but I also know that from the broadcaster's standpoint, they don't want to launch a bunch of things that nobody can see. So it's got to be sort of a progression, month to month, year to year. And I think the focus, frankly, has to be on improving the experience for the viewer, for those people who do have it, teaching people about the importance of an antenna, because a lot of people have no idea why you would want to do that. And I would end with the magic word. I mean, it's free.
Yeah.
FREE. What is better than that? You know, especially in these times. Somebody sent me a note yesterday and said it's a problem of budget, meaning you can't budge it. You know, there's only so much money that people have, and how many streaming subscriptions are you really going to be able to afford? So I think the idea that local television could be, again, be free to air with a better signal, more services, is very appealing, or should be very appealing. And so in the view of the broadcasters, you know, that's where they want to focus.
Yeah, and just going back to what you said, I think like maybe 20 minutes ago or so about the amount of TV sales. You know, accessibility is great with 3.0, but you know, if 12,000 3.0 TVs are being sold every day, how many of those people are actually buying it for ATSC 3.0? And how many people are going to connect something in that F connector? Because F connectors are kind of an older technology. They're going to say, oh, I just want to plug in my PlayStation. I just want to plug in my Roku or whatever into it. So yes, the 12,000 TVs a day are there, but I have to imagine it's a super small minority of people that are actually using the TV for over-the-air TV and actually getting that, you know, with 3.0.
Not necessarily. I would encourage you to lift your blinders just a second. I mean, you're coming at it from your standpoint, which I appreciate. I mean, you're
It's
young.
just it's asking people. I know friends, people in the area, you know, just general consumery stuff, and that's the vibe that I'm getting out of it.
Yeah. Well, if you ask, as the Consumer Technology Association has done, because they represent antenna manufacturers, how many consumers, whether it's ATSC 1.0 or 3.0, how many people actually have an antenna connected at home to something? It's 25%.
Mhm.
It was a little higher during the pandemic, and it kind of has come back. It was like 28%. It has been as low as 20% a decade ago. So it kind of goes up and down, but as we sit here today, it's at about 25%. I think that when there is even more compelling programming that's available, and you find out that you can get that for free, and it used to be, okay, I buy a TV and I immediately subscribe to a video service, cable, satellite, telco. I mean, that was just what you did.
Of course.
85, 90% of people, that they got used to paying a cable bill. That was what it was.
The 80s and 90s, that was the stuff.
Today, it may be about the same percentage if you throw streaming into that bucket. Of course, streaming isn't using an F connector, to your point. But I think there's just lots more choices. At the end of the day, I think for broadcasters, they don't necessarily care. They may have a preference about who they make the most money from. But so long as you're getting the signal and you're getting the ads that are there and you're getting the promotions and the programming, you know, that's what's most important, regardless of the source. So I think it's interesting, you know, something like YouTube TV, your channel's on YouTube, but the TV service is more people watching YouTube TV than all the other pay for services for local channels like that, you know, that are out there. That's going to continue to be important. Cable's important, satellite's important, although less so than in the past. And we think that free over the air, particularly as a supplement for what I would call the cord nevers. Like, you're probably a cord never, meaning you've never had cable.
Yeah, so my parents had cable. I got them to switch to Sling because I still wanted to watch a few cable channels, and then we use an antenna. But unfortunately, actually, right when I got into antennas, in their opinion, the programming quality has dropped significantly. And basically, it's just been like America's Got Talent in the summer, a few shows during the winter. And, you know, we'll watch the Olympics, we'll watch, you know, our local Buffalo Bills games. And other than that, it's not really being used as much.
Well, and part of that, by the way, is we're now reaping the benefits, if you can call it that, of a strike. You know, the strikes that
Yeah.
a year ago. Well, there aren't as many scripted programs. They're not the same kind of dramatic things that you might be familiar with or looking for. So anyway, my point was that I think there are a lot of younger cord never people. They've never been a subscriber to cable or satellite. They do subscribe to other things. Let me put on my hat just about the Indiana broadcasters, because I'm very familiar with our numbers here in my state. We're just one state in the Midwest out of 50. But we've got about a third of our viewers here are what are called BBO, broadband only. So 36% of people watching television here in my state, and we're not abnormal. We're maybe a little bit more corny, haha, than some states, but corn's a big deal here, as is motor racing. But a third of people are not watching local channels at all. They're only subscribing to Disney Plus and Netflix and Hulu and whatever.
And I'd imagine that those numbers are skewed way more for younger people than older people. Like that 25% figure, there has to be like, maybe it's like 50% for 65 plus, and it's like 8% for people my age. So that's what I was talking about with like the plug in a TV and just plug in a PlayStation, because I'm going about this in like a 18 to 25 demographic in the moving generations.
However, when you ask people who don't have an antenna today, when they hear, well, you could get channels for free, would you consider buying one? About a third of the people say, yeah, I think in the next year I'm going to check that out, which is certainly encouraging if you manufacture antennas. And there are a couple of companies left that still do that and have quite a big business at that. So I don't know. I think the one thing I would say for certain is that it's going to change. It's not going to be the same thing that it was 20 years ago. It's not going to be the same thing that it was 5 years ago. People's habits are going to continue to evolve, and it probably, honestly, is driven by the programming. You're going to want to
100%.
Even your parents made this comment to you, like, well, we don't really see what we wanted, so we want to keep that slim.
It's all on Peacock. It's all on Paramount Plus. They don't want to subscribe to that. It used to be like there was the Blacklist. There were all sorts of good shows, and then they seemed to just disappear. And then all the new ones that took its place just went over to like Peacock.
Right. So that pendulum went this way. So, does it come a different direction? Who's to say? But I think one thing is for certain, it's not going to be the same in a few years as it is today. And in conclusion, I would say broadcasters didn't want to be left at the side of the road. And I think if we had just stayed with ATSC 1.0 and ridden that horse, eventually there wouldn't be any viewers.
I agree with that.
Right. So we had to do something rather than turn our backs on streaming. Another feature, you may not be a local news person, but one of the great benefits for a local station that does news is you're now going to be able to deliver to a viewer sitting back on his couch or her couch the same weather reports, sports reports, news reports that they might get on a linear basis if they were watching your program, or they could certainly go to your website and see it on their phone or their laptop. But there's really no easy way to do that watching the big screen TV. Well, with ATSC 3, it has an overlay that the industry calls Run 3 TV, which is an application that about 100 stations have deployed. I'm not sure in New York if you have this.
WNYO has, I think 3 out of the 5 channels on WNYO have.
And I think it is in place in Miami, where you go to school, where a local station can make the decision. Well, I want to offer to the viewer always to have the weather forecast. So I was just in Florida last week, so we're watching the radar like, okay, we're good for a couple hours. And afternoon thunderstorms are going to come through. So the ability for a local station to repurpose the assets they've already created, they've already broadcast, they're already putting it on the website. It's going to stay on the website, of course, but now a local station can do something much different by serving that up to a viewer. PBS South Florida is another example of another benefit of this technology. There wasn't room on that transmission stick for PBS South Florida. ABC.
There was on PLP 0 that's used for data delivery as a service, but
well, for whatever reason, whether it was that or other reasons, PBS was not there, and so PBS South Florida is delivered via IP to next-gen TV viewers. If you pick up your remote and you're scanning through the channels in Miami in next-gen TV, and you've got a next-gen TV set, you are going to see PBS South Florida on the program guide. When you make that selection, the TV is going out to the internet to pull that signal in. Now, the viewer doesn't know any different and shouldn't really care. This technology allows sort of a seamless integration of over the top with over the air. So that's a very early example, but I think, more of that could come because a local station could fire up any number of channels if it wanted to, if there were a special event or something happening.
Yeah, we're seeing that with T2 from Sinclair right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And T2, Sinclair's also added high dynamic range 24 hours a day to T2. T2 is the secondary tennis channel network. Yeah. If you're really into tennis, fabulous. You can get that over the air for free. So that's
over the internet.
Well, over the internet, but I mean, it shows up in the program guide. Yeah.
And I think you could also just go to like a fast streaming service and also get T2 from there. So it's, you're still using the internet, but
yes,
it's innovative. I'll give it that, to have both in the same lineup.
Yes, but to put yourself in the place, I don't want to put words in your parents' mouth, but they may not sit down and go to a fast channel provider to get that. That you could just see it on your program guide and be able to tune to it, make it super easy. That's on us as broadcasters to figure out how do we make this easier for people. Because I think another point that you made, I would agree with, this has to be easy. It has to be good stuff if it's going to be successful.
Yeah, the accessibility thing is key. Making sure that you don't necessarily need an external antenna is, I think, the big winner. So I know right now there's transmissions that require higher SNRs and you don't have single frequency networks yet, but for the future, I think definitely for my generation, making sure that they don't have to plug in an external antenna. They just pop it up on their phone. They download like the Sinclair app and it's got like all the local stations that Sinclair owns on the app and it uses the 3.0 chip. And to me, that's the future. I don't really see, external antennas as, the future for my generation.
Some of it is physics.
I know. There's ways to do it.
Super limited with a device like this, but it's a little bit easier with a laptop. You get a little bit more landscape, more space. But certainly things are going to get nothing but better because technology is going to improve, whether that's antenna technology or transmission technology. And I got to hand it to Sinclair. They are pushing the envelope. I mean, they're trying everything they can to figure out how do we best take advantage of this sandbox that's out there with ATSC 3.
Yeah, they're now starting to use Dolby Atmos on one of their stations here in Buffalo on WUTV. It's 5.1.4 audio.
Yeah.
I had some problems with some of my ATSC 3.0 devices handling it, but after a few software updates, it's been working pretty well.
The good thing about YouTube and your channel, Dylan, is that it goes everywhere, right? It's not limited to Western New York. It's not limited to where you go to school. So there may be somebody watching who says, all right, I got it. I want to know in my city, are you on the air? What channels are exactly on the air? And what are the devices that, that are going to pick this up? So broadcasters have come together and started a website called watchnextgentv.com. It's very easy to go there. You put in your zip code and it will pop up and tell you, here are the 1.0 channels that you can easily receive today. Here are the 3.0 channels, assuming there are some, or if there aren't any, it'll say there aren't any. And also another part of that website has all of the receivers from Samsung, Hisense, TCL, Sony, as well as ADTH, Zenwell, that are out there that are approved, certified and approved, verified, so they're going to work exactly as planned. So that's just a nice resource. Even if you don't use it for anything more than, gee, I wonder what channels are on in my market. Is it worth me considering this? That's a really free, great place to go.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you very much, Dave. I appreciate it. Hopefully we can do another one in the future. I hope I didn't drill you too hard.
No, it's okay. I appreciate your questions. You had good questions.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Bye-bye.
If you like this video, consider subscribing and liking the video. Follow Western New York Over the Air on Instagram, Twitter, and Threads at WNY Over the Air. Like Western New York Over the Air on Facebook at facebook.com/WNY Over the Air. Support the channel on Patreon at patreon.com/WNY Over the Air. And check out WNYOvertheair.com for live band scans, cord cutting tips, and much more.